Hello, everyone. I'm Bob Dempsey, Chair of Neurosurgery at UW, and I'd like to give our COVID update for this period of time. They've been a little bit irregular because I was waiting for some data and change, and there's been some important information, especially about vaccines and about this disease that I think we should discuss because what's happened in the past is dictating what's coming in the future. And I thought this was a good time to talk about that. I'm going to start and end with a quotation from a man by the name of William Faulkner, because he studied time and predicting the future by understanding what's going on today and what happened in the past. He's a Nobel laureate for literature from the United States, and he's famous for saying that the past is never dead, it isn't even past, meaning we learn from where we came, and where we came tell us. We learn from our mistakes we made early in this pandemic, and we learn from the past. If you reflect on this pandemic and the 1918-1919 pandemic, which was flu, a slightly different virus, they're eerily similar. They both rose in the winter, and it was unclear where they came from. Still is in both cases. We mistakenly thought that the 1918-19 pandemic came from Spain because there was a world war and the other countries weren't reporting their early cases for fear of losing a strategic advantage. Spain was neutral, reported theirs, so people thought it came from Spain. May have actually come from the United States, but that's in doubt. It then spread remarkably and kept spreading right through the summer. That's very unusual, same as this pandemic. They usually are very seasonal. This one is not. People began to let their guard down because it wasn't quite as severe, and there was a huge recurrence in the fall. And remember, in the fall here, we had one of the hottest hotspots in the world. But the same things were going on in 1918 as there were in 2020, debates about whether you should wear a mask and whether people should stay out of movie theaters or churches, etc. The same thing. Should sports events be seen? Should people gather? Mistakes were made. And we found out, we learned from that. And yet, after a terrible winter, by March of 1919, the pandemic was ending, was going down. And no one knows exactly why. There are really two possible reasons. The virus changed, and all viruses do. We'll talk about what a mutation means. Or enough people had subclinical cases to stop the virus from finding new sources. That's intriguing because we don't really test for subclinical cases very well. Most of the testing for this present pandemic is done on symptomatic people, or we check for active infection, not antibodies from something that may have happened during the fall or winter, because we don't really have a good antibody test to tell that. So I think that if we look at where we are, which is much better than we were even months ago, we're in a major time of hope and responsibility. And I'll carry that theme forth. Because what we've learned is mask, distancing, and hand washing works. And we can look at that worldwide, but we can also look at that on our own town, our own campus. Every surge that we've seen here have been related to breaks in that, mainly unmasking. Every improvement has been before vaccinations and even during been linked to following the simple rules. So the responsibility is there. Yet, when we look at data, and I do that, when we look at the world, we're beginning to learn important things. India, which does not mask or distance well and has not vaccinated well, is also going down dramatically. But by going down, they're going down 80%. That's true, but they've only, like us, reached the numbers we were in the early fall, end of summer. So we're very pleased. We kind of, in the back of our mind, think maybe we're at the end. We may not be. and we have to be responsible and keep mask, distance, hand washing. The actual figures are important. 2.5 million people dead in the United States, in the world. 25% of those dead in this country. And that's really very regrettable, very problematic. And to me, really kind of a sign of where we are and where we should be. Vaccinations work. We're getting that data. And they work even against some mutations, because what we're seeing, like in Israel, is that the vaccinations have brought their rate down below that of the surrounding area. Israel is an area that has vaccinated 70% of their population. That's near herd immunity, not quite, but close. And we can see that their rates are below the rest of the world, and that includes for some of the mutant variants, meaning that vaccinations are effective, maybe not universally or completely, but effective against the variants, the mutations that we're seeing. So vaccinations become very important. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk today is we will this weekend, I'm confident, approve the J&J vaccine, the third vaccine of the 30-some that are being tried, to be approved conditionally, just as the first two were, here in the United States. It's important to know that this could be a game changer, even though it's less effective than the two we already have. Its efficacy has been rated between 60 and 85%, depending on how you do the test and where you do it. I'll talk about that. Remember, the other two, the Pfizer and Moderna, were 95% effective, but their tests were done before some of these mutations took place. So we know that there are efficacies against the new variations, such as the South African strain, which is easier to catch and maybe more virulent. But the J&J, which might be 80% effective in the United States against those strains, was still 60% effective against the new strain in South Africa when tested there. That's good, because if we can get 60% down and vaccinate large numbers of people, this virus will still have a great deal of difficulty finding new hosts. Now, it is different as well because it's only one dose and it need not be deep frozen. And therefore, it may be a very good vaccine for the world, the Congo, Nigeria, where we don't have those freezers. But it is important to know it uses a different technology. This is DNA, and its vector is not a glycoprotein, but rather an adenovirus, meaning you are injected with a virus which isn't supposed to hurt you, which carries this antigen, DNA, from the coronavirus, so your body recognizes and stops coronavirus. There are several steps in making that vaccine. It is old technology, so it's cheaper, but it's slower. And therefore, turning out the hundreds of millions of doses we need in the United States and the billions we need in the world is going to be slow. We're actually faster making the vaccines of the two new ones, which are much more expensive. The figures you have to look at for vaccinations are, we've got about 16% of people vaccinated, nowhere near Israel. And not all of those have gotten their complete dosing, about 9% of that. So we have a long way to go. We're talking we need hundreds of millions of doses, and the state right now is looking at maybe dozens of thousands. UW, for example, gets 2,000 doses a week. They've just agreed to up it to 3,000 doses a week. We need 16,000 doses a week. And that's important because if you think about the distribution of these vaccines, you'll see the problem. We have thought we were very orderly, The first thing we wanted to do, which made perfect sense, was the nursing homes, because that's where most of the diseases and death and hospitalizations came. And when we did that, the hospitalization rates plummeted. That's hugely important for our overall health system. We did healthcare workers because they're directly handling the virus, the rates plummeted. And if we look at our healthcare workers here at UW, the rate of coronavirus we see is far below that of Dane County, meaning the vaccines work. Maybe not perfectly, and not everybody had the vaccine, but they're less exposed because their coworkers aren't getting it. So that's important. But the hundreds of millions of doses we need, we bought 600 million doses of the first two vaccines. It'll take them well into the fall to roll that out. And the J&J, with their older technology, is talking about providing dozens of thousands, dozens of millions, not hundreds of millions. So it's going to be slow, but it's another armamentarium. Is it reasonable to get that vaccine? Sure. I'm happy that we have the Pfizer and Moderna here because they're more effective. That makes sense to me. But we do know that J&J is helpful against some of the variants. Distribution's a problem. We thought it would be very orderly. We would then go by next most risk, the older and then younger and younger. And the government has really changed that. And what they're saying is, yes, right now, today, our group we should be giving is over 65. We've really only touched half of the over 65s in this state. And that's most unfortunate. That's supply and distribution, not the actual giving it, but actually the supply. We now, on Monday, will open up from 1.6 million people eligible to another 700,000 eligible in this state as we open it up to teachers, some essential workers, defined differently in different areas, but primarily EMS, things of that nature. That means 2 million people when we don't have the doses to give it to them as fast as I'd like. I'm still holding to my standards of my last talk that I believe the government's efforts to ramp up production of the first two vaccines and bring the third one online mean that we will get through the highest risk age group during the winter. And then we will move through the essential in the spring and the general population, our 20-year-olds, in the summer. And I believe that that is the race we're in between the vaccines and the mutations. Because viruses spread when they mutate. They sit there as the common cold. They get some key mutation that makes them very dangerous, and they are COVID-19. And what we want is this thing to go back to being the common cold. We probably won't eliminate it from the face of the earth like smallpox, but rather make it more indolent by eliminating the really infectious components and let it mutate, because mutations can make it more indolent or more virulent. We have heard about mutations worldwide, the South African, which we have some data on, the British, which is going to be most common, but appears to be affected by the vaccine. We now know the South African, which is more dangerous and almost exactly like the Brazilian, closer to us, can be treated by the vaccine, imperfectly, but pretty well. All the other variations you hear on the news, some of it is a little bit the fad, because mutation's been going on all along. We use that to say, you've got the variation that came to the United States from China to Milan to New York. You've got the one that came from China to Seattle to Madison. And that didn't really possess more or less virulence. We do know the South African is more virulent, but we also know that the vaccine is pretty effective. So vaccines are important. The rollout is important. And the mutations are something that are a nature of any time you have a lot of virus in the population, it's going to mutate. If you isolate more and more of the population down to a smaller area, it's not going to have as much ability to mutate becomes so virulent. We can get it back into its Pandora's box. It will probably be one of the common cold or flu-like syndromes that we have periodically and that we take booster shots for. I believe that'll be the case because the vaccines, given enough lead time, several months, can be developed for any change in the virus. We just do not want to let it get ahead of us by having enough people to infect. So I'm very hopeful. The numbers are very, very good. Mind you, they're only as good as they were midsummer last year when we were very worried. So they could worsen again. We are not done. It's the time of hope and responsibility. So how do we get through this? Well, I go back to Faulkner because I was fascinated. His books are very confusing. As he works through time back and forth, you lose track of characters. And one of his masterpieces, Sound and the Fury, he has a little appendix of each of the characters. And this character went crazy, and this character sold the farm. And the last one, really only a few words, is really a central character, the African-American nanny that raised this family. It was Dempsey. And all he says about Dempsey, one person, he says, they endured. And that's fascinating because he goes back to that theme in his Nobel Prize acceptance when he talks about people. And he says, I believe that people will not merely endure, they will prevail because they possess a spirit capable of compassion, sacrifice, and endurance. And his job was to remind them of the courage, honor, hope, pride, compassion, pity, and sacrifice, which have been the glory of our past and define our future. So, finally, it is a time of hope and responsibility for us. Spring is coming. Virus is decreasing. As it decreases, hospitalizations and death decrease. But there are hints. It could rise. We can keep it down. We know how to do it. And we need to keep it down till vaccinations make it impossible to spread and continue to mutate. So we still have responsibility. I know this has been a time of great stress, but the remarkable resilience of all of our staff, of all of you all, has been inspiring. I'm very proud of you. We will get through this, and this is a hopeful time, but don't let your guard down. Thanks very much.